So now I please ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Tom Trebat.
My warm greetings to all of you here with us in Rio and to all my colleagues throughout the global network of Columbia. I'll start my talk talking about another country, and that is China. And as I think about the topic of democracy and development, it stands a little bit as a puzzle, doesn't it? Why is it that democracy is so important to economic development? Why is it that China, clearly not a democracy, has been going for 35 years in a row and doing so well? One is struck by China, the skyscrapers, the outbursts of consumption, the energy, the technology, the quality of its people, many of them going to places like Colombia and studying all around the world. Maybe democracy, representative democracy as we know it, isn't so important as we thought. Isn't that sort of what the puzzle that China's growth presents for us? And elsewhere in the world, representative democracy, a court, a Congress, seems to be breaking down. The people feel alienated, cut off from the institutions that should be representing them. Of course, we have the great events in Cairo that have shaken Cairo, the social media-driven protests in Cairo that led to the overthrow of a dictatorship and installed a democratic government, which in itself didn't last very long. Even in New York City and all throughout the United States, the so-called Occupy Wall Street movement. What was that? But that a thought that our institutions of representative government aren't really representing us as well as we would like. Isn't that a little bit the message of the Tea Party as well? That we can't trust the institutions to represent what the people want. We have to take matters into our own hands and go into the streets. And then finally here in Rio, very shocking, outside the doors of this theater and throughout this beautiful city and throughout every major city in Brazil, a wave of protests that started in recent months and to one degree or another still continues. A sign behind me is an indication that if the bus fares do not go down, the city is going to stop, and stop it did. And stop again, it might. So clearly there's an unhappiness that people don't feel alienated. They feel that representative democracy, even when it formally exists, isn't up to the task. I'd like to sort of bring it back now to something we can understand, the lessons of democracy and development here in Brazil, and talk a little bit about the events of recent history. And recent history, we know, is a little bit slippery. Persons like myself who lived through it. I first came to Brazil in the early 1970s. I've lived here before. I lived here now. I've come back and forth a lot. I've witnessed a lot of these events. I've read about them, met some of the key people involved. And you think, well, I have a good understanding of what went on, but it can be a little tricky. We think we have a memory of what happened. We think we know what it meant, but do we really? So I thought maybe we could just focus on an individual, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the great former president of Brazil, and look at what his life and his actions have taught us about democracy and development in Brazil. This is Fernando Henrique, is a much younger man, of course, leading a broad mobilization of civil society. I'm going to talk about this more later on. This is Fernando Henrique when he was inaugurated for president and beginning 2 successful terms. I don't know where they get that beautiful old car in Brazil, but they always use it for presidential inaugurations, and it seems to work. It seems to work just fine. That was he beginning his term in office, and his autobiography of Fernando Henrique was called The Accidental President. No one probably was better prepared to be president of Brazil or of any other country than this wonderful intellectual statesman, polished citizen, fluent in many languages, globally experienced, well-known, a professor at the Sorbonne at the University of California, a lecturer at Columbia, and so many other universities, that he got to be president. His talents put him there, but the way he got there was quite accidental. More on that a little bit later. But what impresses me, too, about Fernando Henrique and tells us a little bit more of our unfolding story by focusing a little bit on this man is the life he's had following his term in office. He left office at the end of 2002 and has become a global statesman. He fits in with a wonderful group of inspiring global leaders. No, this particular collection of global leaders is known as the Elders, put together by the great Nelson Mandela. And here they are leaders who instead of accepting a comfortable retirement and the accolades and the comforts of post periods in office, worked tirelessly on behalf of peace and human rights in the Middle East, in the case of Fernando Henrique Cardoso in terms of drug policy and human rights everywhere. But I get a little bit ahead of myself. I just want to introduce the character of Fernando Henrique, whom I'm using to illustrate broad movements that involve millions of people here in Brazil, as a way of having someone real that we can relate to as we talk about some of these bigger issues of democracy and development. But let me step back, literally, and let me tell you a little bit of a story here. This is a story, now only an economist could love a graph like this, so I have to control myself a little bit. This is a story, and I want you to guess the country. This is a story that grew at rates of 9% a year for almost 9 years in a row. That's like doubling your income every 8 or 9 years. Imagine your household income, your family income, your company income doubling every 8 or 9 years. This country was on that fast track. This is a country that successfully courted the international capital markets. Indeed, was a virtual magnet for foreign direct investment, which engaged in huge infrastructure projects and seemed to pull them off quickly and well. But it was also a country, it is a country marked by a strong central and authoritarian government, which brooked little or no opposition, which knew what was to be done, determined it, and then did it. This was a miracle. Here's a country that is experiencing great order. Look, if you superimpose Chinese growth in a more recent time period, that's China, the blue line is China, from 1997 through 2010, virtually the same. It had the same kind of growth. Brazil was the China of my, I'll be honest about it, of my youth when I came here. It was a brick country. We use that word a lot. It was a brick before we even knew what bricks were. It was, in other words, this is a country growing with the sleeping giant that had awakened. This is a country with strong central government that knows what the people want and is able to deliver it in ways that are very pleasing to international investors, to the world as a whole. Everything was organized. People did what they were supposed to do. They lined up. They were obedient. There were no major protests taking place. And by the way, major infrastructure projects were taking place. Some of these will take your breath away as we think about them in today's terms. Can you imagine superhighways in the Amazon, the so-called Trans-Amazonica? But that was a riveting, iconic image from my day, and it was one that people thought, that's a pretty good idea. The combination was a very direct one, an impactful combination, a strong military government, large projects, huge state-owned enterprises, lots of credit flowing into the Brazilian economy, and rapid economic growth on the basis of infrastructure that we so clearly need here in Brazil. But the miracle, and that's what it was called, no one would smile at that reference today, back in the 1970s and late 60s and early 1970s, the miracle turned out to have foundations built upon shifting sands. After a period of time, inflation, we'll talk more about that later today, inflation, which is going to disorganize the Brazilian economy for such a long period of time and prevented development from taking place, inflation began to come out of control. Brazil had borrowed a lot of money, and world interest rates rose. Creditors became a little suspicious. When is Brazil going to pay us back? It's one thing to lend money to Brazil, but what about getting our money back? And they cut off the credit to Brazil. Part of that is seen in the growth of Brazil's total foreign debt in a straight line fashion from the early 60s and early 70s when it had very little foreign debt to the early to mid 1980s when it had an enormous burden of foreign debt and no access to credit. Stagnation set in. It was called, the words are haunting to me even today, the period of the crash, the post-miracle, was referred to as the lost decade. I mean, those are terrifying words from the point of view of a poor society or a lower middle income society like Brazil seeking to advance, to lose an entire decade of economic growth. But that was it. The first miracle gone with the wind. What everybody had thought was such a wonderful thing turned out to have led to a deep stagnation in Brazil. So it was kind of a end of one miracle, so-called miracle. But beneath the embers, much was happening in Brazil. The embers of the destroyed early vision of the Brazilian economy was a stilling many forms of life. And those stillings and those forms of life were really the birth of civil society in Brazil. Hard to put our minds around civil society. What is that? Well, it's churches, it's labor unions, it's opposition political parties, there are newspapers, there are student groups, there are civic societies of all sorts, where people take matters into their own hands and debate issues which affect them. This was happening in Brazil. And now let me return a little bit to the case of Fernando Henrique Cardoso and bring things a little bit up to date as I set the ground for what I will call the real Brazilian miracle. Abroad, Fernando Henrique Cardoso had returned from exile. He was in exile from the 1960s and the 1970s. And he was a key leader in putting together all these different groups of civil society in Brazil. And how did he do it? He did it in a nonviolent way. Fernando Henrique Cardoso and many others like him were not really of the right, not really of the left, and not really even of the center of the political spectrum. They were a civil society. It was something different. It was the people. It was the stirrings of democracy in Brazil. And these stirrings had their finest moment, perhaps, in the early 1980s in a campaign. The signs behind me say, are from 1984, and they say, "I want to vote for president." And it was on that simple theme, I want to vote for president, quero votar para presidente, that a nation really did come awake and a civil society did come together, overcoming all sorts of differences, regional and income and class and race and gender and every other difference that might keep us from working together was overcome. Eu quero votar para presidente. I want to vote for president. Fernando Henrique was a leader in that movement. There he is as quite a young man. And look who's with him. I let a little bit the story at the end slip out here at this point. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Again, what I say, not right, not left, not even center. Civil society, people coming together. There are other wonderful figures in this picture that the Brazilians here will appreciate, but the future president himself, another future president, is among these people, gathered bravely on the streets, in this case of São Paulo, and at some tremendous personal risk. So this was the beginnings of civil society. Much happened. I'm taking a very abbreviated approach to a very interesting and period in Brazilian history, but they eventually were able to vote for president. And this is the wonderful man, Tancredo Neves, who was elected, but look who's right alongside him. The professor from the Sorbonne, the PhD in sociology, the great intellectual. Look at him, back from exile, committed to nonviolence, committed to the growth of civil society. Look who winds up next to the future president, the Tancredo Neves, who was elected and tragically died before he could complete his term in office. But I want to keep the focus on Fernando Henrique. Many exciting years followed after Brazil had returned to a formal democracy. But the highlight, I would say, was Fernando himself, the accidental president, actually becoming president. A beautiful scene here of Fernando Henrique on the day that he won election. By the way, he defeated Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in this election. His presidency, which I'd like to just summarize quickly for you, it's 8 years, elected to 2 successive terms, was a wonderful exercise in democracy. Frustrating. I think Fernando Henrique will tell us, and does tell us, I wanted to do so much more, but the courts wouldn't let me. The Congress wouldn't let me. I had to negotiate for votes to get some things through. I had to give up on others. But he tried greatly and put through many different political reforms. But I think what he's best known for, what lives with us today, is this PhD sociologist, I'm saying this as an economist, the PhD sociologist solved the economic problems. He had help of a number of economists, of course, but he did. In this little graph, we'll show it to you. Brazil's major Problem had been high, uncontrolled rate of inflation. Look at that. It reached 2,500% in 1993. Fernando Henrique Cardoso was the architect, along with a team of very talented economists, of a plan. We call it the Real Plan, that somehow, through a bit of financial engineering and good old-fashioned cutting of expenditures and reform, was able to put the technical building blocks in place for a decline in inflation. But he managed more than that. He managed to convince people that their future in Brazil didn't need to be one marked like the past had been by these outrageous bouts of inflation, this what is called the cruelest tax of all, the tax on the poor. So after 1994, the graph barely moves, doesn't it? If that were your cardiac monitor, you'd be very worried. But it's a flat line there, but it's actually a very good thing, very low inflation. And that low inflation made it possible for the Brazilian economy, getting back to our development teams, to develop a very strong economic infrastructure, a stronger economic infrastructure, a flourishing agricultural sector, a competitive industrial sector, for jobs to be created, for a middle class eventually to emerge in Brazil. So this is probably his greatest legacy, was on the inflation front. But I don't think he'd want me only to talk about this, or I don't think we can leave the story at that. Fernando Henrique, what is development for? It just can't be, as we economists sometimes like it to be, about the public sector debt, the rate of inflation, monetary policy. It has to be about people. It has to be that citizens perceive a tangible benefit from what's happening. And in this too, in the 1990s, in this Brazil, or else this really isn't a democracy. It isn't really a miracle. But you've got to get people to feel that they're part of what's going on. So in so many fields here in Brazil, mandatory health care, universal primary education, an end to illiteracy in Brazil, reaching out to the poorest of the poor in Brazil in the rural sectors through land reform and so many other ways. Social indicators and social policy became a hallmark initially of the Cardoso administration during his 8 years in power. And what we see, the graph is a little bit misleading. From a peak level of inequality, up indicates a higher level of inequality in society. Brazil's peak inequality occurred in 1989, and that made Brazil truly one of the most unequal, I'm sorry to say this, one of the most unequal societies on earth. But after the Real Plan, after inflation was controlled, after investments occurred in health and education, jobs were created, those things that allow people to lift themselves from poverty, as well as with the assistance of government. Inequality in Brazil has continued to decline, not only after the Real Plan, but in the years that have followed and right up, frankly, to the present day here in Brazil. Well, I'm getting close to the end of my story here about Fernando Henrique Cardoso, about democracy and development in Brazil. And I kind of bring it back a little bit in time, don't I? Because I think what's important in what makes this truly a miracle that has occurred, a country that has created a constitution, empowered civil society, strengthened its economy, improved the lives of people to an important degree, that really, in a sense, turned a corner all in the space of 35 years. That is, I think, what I'm saying is grounds for a miracle, but maybe that's not what proves it's a miracle. What proves it's a miracle is what happens after. Does it stay in place? Is this, again, the case of the shifting sands, or is this something that happened here in Brazil in a very short period of time due to the actions of millions of people, but a number of very strong, powerful figures? Did it stand the test of time? Did it continue? And I've gone back to this picture from two young men on the barricade, so to speak, together in the early 1980s, confronting who knows what in front of them in terms of opposition and threats. And these same, no longer young, but accomplished citizens, this is Fernando Henrique Cardoso, in a very dramatic way, turning the presidential sash over to his major political competitor, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who then went on to 2 successful terms of his own in Brazil. This was the first time in Brazilian history, democratic history in Brazil doesn't have long roots. Never before had someone been elected and re-elected as president and then turned over the sash of office to someone who was his political opponent. And it goes back to the point I was saying, not right, not left, not even center. Democracy, civil society, both have advanced it. Most of what Fernando Henrique's legacy was created not by him and not by the people around him, but it was an uprising of civil society. Lula, which is another story, has continued that. So the continuity is, I think, what makes this, in my mind, the defining point about what I call the real Brazilian miracle. It's, I think, Brazil's gift to the world. It's something Brazilians themselves, sometimes in the day-to-day issues and pressures and protests that occur and inconveniences of life and the image that we have that the country should be better than it is, sometimes we need here in Brazil to step back. And I think people outside Brazil will enjoy and know and learn from this story. And I have enjoyed being able to tell it to you today. And thank you very, very much for listening to me.